Free agency day two has come and gone, not as active as day one, but we definitely had some moves around the NFL. Plenty of more signings, a quarterback signing, a trade, and much more. Let's talk about all of it here right now. NFL Spotlight starts now. Welcome in. It is the Wednesday, March 12th edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. I am your host, Ari Meirov. Today officially is the start of free agency. That's what the NFL calls it, but most of the free agents are basically gone. A lot of the big names are basically gone. But today, 4 Eastern, is when all those deals that you've been reading about over here the last 2 days, all those players could put pen to paper, all the trades that we've had over here yesterday, this week, last week, 2 weeks ago, Deebo Samuel, all those trades that have happened also become official today. And day two of free agency, which was on Tuesday, definitely had a lot of movement around the NFL. Not as active as day one, kind of slowed down a little bit, but there is more coming up over here throughout the course of today. There's a lot of, I guess I'll just say, behind the scenes stuff that is not public yet that maybe it will become public, maybe it won't, but there's some big things over here that could go down around the NFL. Let's talk about everything going on, things that have happened, things that could happen over here on the show here today. Let me bring in my good friend Ben Allen. Ben, what is going on? How are you?
I'm doing well, Ari. Yeah, like you said, a little bit of a slower day today here, which is probably good. We all needed a little bit of a breather after the craziness that was day one, quote unquote, of free agency. But let's go ahead and talk about one of the most impactful ones nonetheless. Daniel Jones, he's going to the Indianapolis Colts. He's expected to go there and compete with Anthony Richardson to be the week one starter. Obviously, Richardson was a guy that they invested a lot in as a top 5 pick. Now it seems like he may not be their long-term guy. They're bringing in Daniel on a deal that is going to pay him about $13 million plus in base. So it's nothing to sneeze at, especially even if he were to be just the backup. So how does this make you feel about this deal? And do you think that ultimately they want Jones to win this?
I don't really know why so many people were surprised by this. Their general manager, Chris Ballard, at the Combine in Indianapolis, said this a few weeks ago. We are going to sign a veteran quarterback in free agency, and we're going to have an open competition in training camp. And Daniel Jones was the one quarterback they were targeting throughout this process. And this decision for Daniel Jones came down to the Colts and the Vikings, the team that it was on last year. And both those teams made very similar offers. And essentially, from Daniel Jones, if I had to read the tea leaves here, if he goes back to Minnesota, he could basically be what Sam Darnold was last year. But the idea of playing JJ McCarthy is going to be out there throughout the course of the year. The fan base, the GM, the head coach, like, we just drafted this guy number 10. That's going to be breathing down his neck the entire time. If he goes to Indianapolis, Anthony Richardson, he's been there for the last 2 years. He's played some, missed some, injuries, benching, a lot of things going on. His leash is already short, and the Colts were adamant to him that when you come here, we're paying you this money, a lot of money, and you're going to come in and have an open competition in training camp. Like, this is going to be one of the bigger topics we're going to have over here when we get to the month of August, when training camp officially kicks off around the NFL. Like, everyone's going to be talking about who's going to be the starting quarterback in Indianapolis. So he's going to have a really good shot over here of winning this job. And he essentially is taking the Sam Darnold role that he had in Minnesota last year when he signed that 1-year, $10 million deal and cashed in this offseason with Seattle. That is what Daniel Jones is hoping would happen for him now as he signs this 1-year, $14 million deal up to $17.7 million to try to become the starter in Indy, have a big year, and then become a free agent again next offseason with the potential of signing a lucrative deal, whether it's in Indianapolis or somewhere else. That is the vision that Daniel Jones has over here. And one little side note to all of this, we're going to talk about the compensatory picks over here at the back end of the show. That was officially announced over here yesterday. The Vikings, by taking Daniel Jones and signing him at the end of the year and elevating him to the active roster in Week 18 and for the playoff game, they're going to get a pretty nice compensatory pick next year for Daniel Jones leaving them and signing with the Colts on this big contract. So some pretty cool, a pretty cool nugget over here for Minnesota, who wanted him back, but they're going to lose him over here. He ends up in Indy. And one final note on this, the Vikings now only have JJ McCarthy. Darnold in Seattle, Daniel Jones in Indy, Nick Mullins, who was there, is now in Jacksonville. I do believe they're going to sign a veteran quarterback at some point of the year, sign, trade, something. I don't think they're fully satisfied of going into next year with just JJ McCarthy and handing him the job. It's yours no matter what. I think they want to go through a similar process to last year where they signed Sam and they also had JJ and basically have that be an open competition. And Sam was going to win last year. This time around, JJ will have the upper hand, but who will be that second quarterback? I do believe they're going to add somebody over here in the coming days or whenever it is to have another veteran person in that locker room, in the quarterback room. So we'll keep an eye on that as well.
Let's go ahead and touch on some of the other moves that took place around the NFL in the free agency world. We had DeAndre Hopkins signed with the Ravens, Javon Holland to the Giants, and the Vikings actually handed out a pair of really big contracts to Will Fries and Jonathan Allen. Can you give us a little bit of info on each one of these deals?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about Javon Holland yesterday. He was probably one of the bigger names that was not signed after the first day of free agency. 3 years, $45.3 million, a little over $15 million per year for Javon Holland. His market, it was an interesting one, Ben, because, I think he and his people really thought that they would be able to get to 18, 19, maybe $20 million per year. And that market just never materialized. And the Giants really were not one of the initial teams that were super interested in Javon Holland, I would say. I think they thought the market would be stronger for him. I know the Giants were very interested in Cam Bynum, who signed with the Colts. I would say the Giants finished as the runner-up in that sweepstakes, but they pivoted to Javon Holland. They realized that the market there was not what he thought. So they end up giving the same $15 million or so per year that they were willing to offer Cam Bynum over to Javon Holland and add him over here to the secondary. And of course, they also signed Paulson Adebo in the first day of free agency for $18 million per year. And now they get Holland over here for $15 million per year as well. The other teams who were in on this, the Titans were in on this. The Jets, before signing Andre Cisco, they were in on him as well. But the Giants are the team that end up landing him. And their secondary is slowly but surely now coming together with, we mentioned Adebo, Holland, Tyler Nubin, their second round pick last year. They really hope Deontay Banks, who had a really rough year last year, is able to now bounce back over here and become the cornerback number 2 after trying him at cornerback number 1 last year. Drew Phillips could become the slot corner for them as well. So the secondary is coming together. We know about their defensive line with Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. They really believe this defense is coming together now with this move. You mentioned some of the other free agency moves that we had over here across the NFL. We'll start with the Minnesota Vikings, who really had some massive moves made over here. They're focusing on the trenches. And I know, the way I'll explain this one, of course, they signed Will Fries, the guard from the Colts. They signed the center, Ryan Kelly, also from the Colts. That was in day one of free agency. They also signed defensive tackle Jonathan Allen, and defensive tackle Javon Hargrave is expected to join them as well. So a lot of emphasis on the defensive line over there. Big money to all of those players. 5 years, $88 million to Fries, 3 years, and it's going to be $51 million for Jonathan Allen, up to $60 million with incentives, but big money all around over here. But, everyone tried to talk about Sam Darnold, how poor those last 2 games were for him in Minnesota. I think the Vikings are also showing you it was not just Sam. Like, the offensive line, especially on the interior, was a big problem last year. And look at how they're addressing this with the Will Fries addition and the Ryan Kelly addition up front. I mean, if you watched that NFC wildcard game versus the Rams, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, the entire Rams defensive line were always in his face. So I know everyone tried to point the finger at Sam Darnold. He definitely had some bad throws, high, low, all over the place, but the offensive line was an issue, and Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, their head coach and GM, they addressed that over here in day 2 of free agency by addressing the offensive line and the defensive line over here. The Vikings, they lost Sam Darnold. They didn't have him with the money that they were going to pay him. That was $35 million a year, potentially, on a 1-year guarantee deal. They take that money, put it into these other positions over here, and that is how they address their entire roster over here as day 2 of free agency wrapped up for them. Some of the other signings you also mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins to Baltimore, a bit of a flyer here. I'm kind of surprised Baltimore did this, not because Hopkins is not a good player and now he's back with Derrick Henry, who he was with in Tennessee, but I know the Ravens are so into their compensatory picks, and it's like this is something that could potentially affect it. So that one was interesting to me. But you add him to this team with Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews still on the team for now, and now you have DeAndre Hopkins joining them as well. He goes from playing with Patrick Mahomes to now playing with Lamar Jackson. And look, the situation in Kansas City, they really when he joined the team, asked a lot out of him. He's not the same DeAndre Hopkins like the Houston D-Hop and the Arizona D-Hop. It's a bit of a step down. And now in Baltimore, he's not going to be the number one or number two option over here. So they believe he is somebody who could come in, be the wide receiver 3, and help out in this offense and the passing attack with Lamar Jackson. But those were some of the deals over here that we had throughout the course of the day. There were many more. We're still waiting for Aaron Rodgers. We're still waiting for Russell Wilson. There's still a bunch of deals over here that have not happened over here across the NFL. We'll see if it happens over here on Wednesday. But Rodgers and Wilson are the quarterbacks that are kind of holding everything up over here. Giants and Steelers are the teams to watch over there for them. But that's kind of where we are right now. I'll just talk about this as well. The receiver market has not been moving much. We have guys like Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Tyler Lockett, Elijah Moore, Mike Williams. All those guys are still available. And basically the way to say it is these are guys that their markets are just not really set yet. They were expecting more money, but there are so many receivers available. All these guys, most of those guys are third or fourth contract guys, and they're just not getting the money that they want. So they're kind of waiting for who's going to be the first one to sign over here and set the market. So that has not happened over here. And until that happens, I think this might take a little bit more time. We'll see if anything changes here on Wednesday. The one thing that I've heard a lot from people around the NFL, Devontae Adams, who signed with the Rams on Sunday night, 2 years, $46 million. All those veteran receivers I just mentioned, they just can't believe that a receiver was able to get $23 million on the open market over here for a guy like him with that age and where he is. I mean, Diggs, who's off the injury, Keenan Allen, Cooper, like those guys are like, we should be getting at least 15, 17, 18 if he's getting 23. And that offers are not coming in right now. So the Rams, I would say, kind of overpaid for 2 receivers with Devontae and Tutu Atwell. That kind of has affected the rest of the market because all these other guys are like, we should be getting the same thing or something similar. And simply put, it's not happening right now with them.
Well, there was also another move that took place on Tuesday that was not within the free agency realm. It was actually a relatively big trade from like a storylines perspective. The Eagles traded CJ Gardner-Johnson to the Houston Texans for Kenyon Green and a pick swap. Green's largely been a flop for the Texans so far on the offensive line, but it's interesting because they just moved Laramie Tunsil to the Commanders. They're already thin on the offensive line. That's interesting. CJ Gardner-Johnson, obviously, he's had this very storybook, whatever, lot going on with him. He's a big trash talker. He's interesting, this, that, and the other. But he also was in a room that had been relatively crowded until they made moves like, of course, Slay being gone, Bradbury being gone from the cornerback perspective. So a lot of motivations could be looked at within this deal on both sides. What were some of the things that stood out to you as far as this deal goes?
Yeah, this one is an interesting one. And I mean, simply put, the Eagles are Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is somebody who brought a lot of swagger to them. Like they had him a couple years ago when they made the Super Bowl. Howie Roseman or Nick Sirianni, one of them, did mention after letting him go in for agency to Detroit the next year. We missed that the next year when they had that epic collapse from 10-1 to losing a bunch of games in a row. They brought him back in for agency on a multi-year deal. And of course, they win the Super Bowl. But I would just say this, there's some cost-cutting stuff happening in Philadelphia. I would just also say, I mean, there's been this chatter. It's unconfirmed right now, but like Chauncey is a very talkative guy. He just is. And sometimes it gets a little bit too much. So I think the money element of it was definitely part of it. And also, I think they also want to move forward with Sidney Brown, their former day 2 pick in the draft, to take over for him. He's kind of been waiting in the wings over there. So I do think he'll take over here. We'll see if they'll be missing that swag and that energy that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson brings to the team and if it's going to affect them. Because like I said, Howie or Nick, one of them mentioned after he left and then he came back, we missed that the year before. So Brandon Graham also likely retiring. There's a lot of swag and energy that is kind of leaving this team. We know Darius Slay is expected to be released. We know James Bradbury, who was more of a coach this past year, was also going to be released. So they're missing a lot of veteran voices over there, especially in the back end of the defense. They're going to move forward with Cooper DeJean and Kenyon Mitchell as the cornerbacks, but they decide to move him over to Houston. They're going to take that energy and swagger to their secondary. And then the player going back, Kenyon Green, former top 15 pick in the draft a couple of years ago, has been a bit of a disappointment for the Texans so far, but he's somebody who is really versatile. I believe he started 4 or 5 positions on the offensive line when he was at Texas A&M, and we know this already. I mean, Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles offensive line coach, the best in the NFL. Their offensive linemen call it Stoutland University. And Kenyon Green, struggling so far in the NFL, needs the development, still very young, 22, 23 years old. He is somebody who could come in and be with Jeff Stoutland and that offensive line room with, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, Lane Dickerson, and those guys, and Cam Jurgens, and basically have a chance over there to revive his career. He has 1 year remaining on his contract, so it's a contract year for him. And to this point, Mekhi Becton, who revived his career last year, is still a free agent right now. So should Mekhi not return to Philadelphia, Kenyon Green could potentially have a shot over here to become a starter on that offensive line. They also have Tyler Steen there. So it's going to be some competition there, but this is a great opportunity for a former top 15 pick to join the Eagles in that offensive line room. So a very unique trade for sure, but it does get done, and that is now the second trade the Eagles have done so far over here. They also traded Kenny Pickett for Dorian Thompson-Robinson in a pick swap the other day as well.
All right, and let's get to the most exciting part of the program. Let's talk about comp picks. 35 were awarded, and there are going to be a total going out to four picks to 3 teams. So that's 12 total, 15 teams total. It's a lot of numbers here to keep track with, but 35 total, 12 going to a combination of the Ravens, Cowboys, and Dolphins. Rest going to the other places. Anything stand out to you with the comps?
Yeah, I mean, everyone bugs out every year in free agency when the legal tampering period started on Monday, and their teams are just not involved. And it's like, why is our team not involved? There are some teams who take the compensatory pick formula very seriously. And for people who don't know, the NFL has this formula that if you lose players in free agency, you basically are able to get awarded picks for those players leaving in the next draft, as long as you don't sign players as well to a similar AAV. It's a very complicated formula. Over the Cap does a really good job of keeping track of this throughout the course of the year. And the NFL always announces the final order of the picks and who got what around this time of year. So it was announced over here yesterday. And basically the rundown, the Vikings, Dolphins, Giants, Lions, Rams, and 49ers all got third-round picks over here in the 2025 NFL draft. Those picks were added on the back end of the third round. We had picks going in the 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, 7th round. But we'll talk about the third round quickly and how this all worked. The Vikings last year, they lost Kirk Cousins to that big deal to Atlanta. They got a third-round pick for him leaving. The Dolphins lost the guard, Robert Hunt, 5 years, $100 million to Carolina. They got a third-round pick for him leaving. The Giants lost Xavier McKinney to the Packers. Big deal for him. They get a third-round pick for him leaving. And then you have the NFL also started this system a couple years ago that if you have a minority coach or executive, coordinator or executive who leaves to become a head coach or GM, you also get a third-round pick in each of the next 2 drafts. So the 49ers got one for DeMeco Ryans, left a couple years ago to become the coach of the Texans. The Rams got one this year for Raheem Morris, leaving to become the head coach of the Falcons. And the Lions got one for Aaron Glenn, leaving this past cycle to become the head coach of the New York Jets. So that is how the entire formula works. But there are teams who take this entire operation very seriously. The Ravens, you mentioned, Ben, they had the most comp picks coming their way over here in this cycle. They had 4 coming their way. Last year, they lost Patrick Queen in free agency. They lost Jadeveon Clowney in free agency. They lost Kevin Zeitler in free agency. All those players netted them compensatory picks. Geno Stone left them in free agency. All those guys net them compensatory picks. And the way it works is the Ravens are really good at this. The Chargers, their GM Joe Ortiz is really good at this. Howie Roseman in Philadelphia is really good at this. The Cowboys are usually really good at this. Instead of signing players who are actual free agents, they try to prioritize signing players who are cut by their teams, because if you do and sign those type of players, it does not affect the compensatory pick formula. So, for example, Darius Slay, who's going to be released by the Eagles, right? If the Steelers sign him, it does not affect their compensatory pick formula. Evan Ingram, released by the Jaguars. He's taking some visits right now. He's visiting the Chargers here today. If the Chargers sign him, that does not affect their comp pick formula. So the Ravens historically have always been a team who love to do that, and they are going to continue to do that over here. The Chargers, their GM Joe Ortiz loves to do it. The Eagles are going to do it this year because they've lost so many free agents. Look at them right now. If you look at the projections for next year and the comp picks, the Eagles right now are projected to get a third-round pick for Milton Williams, a fourth-round pick for Josh Sweat, and a sixth-round pick for Isaiah Rodgers, and potentially a seventh-round pick for Oren Burks leaving. So that is how the entire thing works. The Eagles have not signed any outside free agents, and as a result, none of those picks are being canceled out. It's a way of getting draft picks, getting more picks, young talent, cheap talent, and more swings of the bat over here in the draft as you try to build out a roster, especially when you have an expensive roster. You need those more picks to get in those cheap, young rookie players to your team. So that was kind of what happened over here on Tuesday, and now we know the exact list of where all those picks are landing.
Well, we got one more thing that just came down the pipe while we were recording here, Ari, which we're going to get you a nice instant reaction to. Joey Bosa is not going to be teaming up with his brother, Nick Bosa. He is going to be heading to the opposite area and the opposite temperature, going to the Buffalo Bills. Are you surprised that they are going to be bringing him in? And how do you think he fits that scheme that now will not have Von Miller there?
Yeah, it's a fascinating signing over here because, I mean, I think everyone saw the reports out there. The buzz was definitely real about the 49ers having interest in pairing him up with his brother Nick Bosa. That's something that Joey has publicly talked about over here in the past. And here he is now. The 49ers have moved on from so many players. Clearly, the money was not there for him. Many people were wondering if the money was going to be something he prioritized over here. Maybe it was just about, making your market get back to place after missing so much time. But the Bills come in. It sounds like the deal is going to be 1 year and over $10 million over here for Joey Bosa to join the Buffalo Bills, a contender, a team that has Super Bowl aspirations, and it's just a team that has been looking for pass rush help. So it definitely makes sense. It's a bit surprising that it's not, there's been rumors about the 49ers. The Dolphins were in there. His father played for the Miami Dolphins. So it's interesting, but the Buffalo Bills, they work in silence over here, and they come through with a deal that is definitely surprising some people that he will go to Buffalo. But 1 year deal, try to prove it here this year that you're healthy, you're still a good player, and get back to the market next year. All right, so that would do it here for our Wednesday, March 12th edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. Of course, like I said, throughout the course of the day here today, all the moves that have happened will become official. All the trades that have happened will become official. And of course, there will be more action around the NFL as free agency continues around the NFL. Stay locked in at My Sports Update on X, 3013.com for the full free agency tracker and the NFL Spotlight Show. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, subscribe. It's greatly appreciated. And we will see all of you here tomorrow morning.